Chapter 3, Old Testament. In this lecture, I'm going to go over the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Now, I'm not going to go over every story and every detail. The only thing I'm going to cover is the things that you need to know within those first 5 books that are pertinent to Catholicism or Christianity. So let's go through the stories and highlight the things you should know as far as Christianity is concerned. Let's start off with the Garden of Eden, Genesis chapter 1, and we see that God creates the heavens and the earth. The first thing that's neat to see about the Garden of Eden is, just a side note, is that if you learn in grade school, actually in high school, world history, and world history teaches you that civilization started in Mesopotamia, and Mesopotamia is located in between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. It's modern-day Iraq. Interesting thing about the Garden of Eden is it's located in between the Tigris and the Euphrates River. Now, we don't know the other 2 rivers, but it's just I think there's an interesting correlation between history's start of civilization and the Bible. They seem to have got it right, the exact location, both history and the Bible. Anyway, God creates the heavens and the earth. He creates man on the 6th day. That would be Friday. Now, this becomes important to Christianity because later on you'll see that Jesus is sacrificed on the 6th day in the New Testament. The next day would be the 7th day. God rests on the 7th day, and that later becomes the Sabbath. I'll show that rule when the Sabbath is talked about at Mount Sinai. The rules of the Sabbath, there's a lot of things you can't do on the Sabbath. And then the next day would be the 8th day, and God is risen on the 8th day. And the 8th day becomes very relevant to circumcision and to baptism. But we'll go over that. Just realize the 6th day was when God creates man. It's also when God is going to redeem man, a sacrifice, Jesus. So in the Garden of Eden, you have free will, and you have the first marriage between Adam and Eve. You have essentially true harmony between a God and man, and you only have one commandment. Adam and Eve are allowed to do anything. There's just one commandment given, and that is to not eat the fruit of the forbidden tree. Unfortunately, the cunning serpent tempts Eve with the apple, and she eats it and gives it to Adam. This becomes the fall of man, or later on we'll see this is the original sin. This will relate to baptism. But this is where baptism comes from. It comes from Adam and Eve's original sin. The result of Adam and Eve eating the forbidden fruit is God provides a prophecy. It's an interesting prophecy because it's the 3rd book, or the 3rd chapter of the 1st book. God already says he's going to send another person. This would be a messianic king. This is Genesis chapter 3:15. This person is going to crush sin, crush the head of the serpent, while the serpent will bruise his heel. In addition to this, this person will come from a woman. Woman's seed will crush the head of the serpent. Notice that women don't have seed. It's men who have seed. Women have eggs. So this is already prophesizing a virgin birth, perhaps. Also, let's add in the fact that notice the role of women in the first story. Eve is taken from Adam's side, or Adam's stomach, Adam's rib, and Eve is the fault for the fall of man. You get the woman's seed for this king, this prophet that's going to come along. This will come from her stomach. She will be the redemption of man, and I'll go into that. And there's a lot of neat stuff that first century Christians talk about as far as Eve is concerned, and Mary and St. Ignatius. Like I say, that I just want you to know where that comes from. We'll go into that a lot. It's very interesting stuff. Anyway, after the fall of man and the original sin, you get Cain and Abel. Adam and Eve are kicked out. You get Cain and Abel. Then you get Noah's flood. Noah's flood, very metaphoric or very symbolic for baptism, because it's the washing away of sin through 8 souls, or 8th day, like circumcision, which we'll get into. It's the washing away of sins with 8 souls, and there's 8 souls on the ark, on Noah's ark. Anyway, after Noah's ark, you get the Tower of Babel, and then you get Abram is introduced in Genesis chapter 12. Abram is a chosen person, again from Mesopotamia, which is neat. But Abram has a son, his only son with Sarah. He actually has another one, Ishmael, but that's with a different person. I'm not going to get into that. So he has this only son, and God tells him to sacrifice this only son. Now, this only son sacrifice theme is going to ring out throughout the Bible, especially when we talk about Jesus being the only son. Abram, or who later becomes Abraham, is going to sacrifice his only son. And God stops him, but God does sacrifice his only son. So this is a theme. Sacrificing the only son goes throughout the Bible, and I'll talk about it. But anyway, God stops Abraham from killing his only son Isaac, and they have a series of covenants. God tells Abram that he's going to have many descendants, and they will make a great nation, as many as the stars. He also tells Abram that he wants the sons circumcised on the 8th day. So that covenant will turn into baptism in the New Testament. We'll go over that, but just realize where that comes from. Isaac, his son, will go on to have Jacob, and Jacob will go on to have 12 sons, which will become later the 12 tribes. When Jacob has these 12 sons, one of these sons is Joseph. And Joseph, the other sons are jealous of, and Joseph is sold into essentially Egyptian slavery. Then there's a famine, and Joseph rises in the ranks of the Egyptian guard, and his dreams are showing the Pharaoh there's going to be a famine. So Joseph actually rises in Egyptian ranks and leadership. Later on, Jacob and his sons don't think that Joseph is dead. They have to come to him for food. He eventually allows them to come live in Egypt, and they settle in the delta of the Nile River. They become the 12 tribes, which is talked about throughout the Bible. And those 12 sons multiply over 400 years. So you can imagine how many, when you're talking about 400 years, how many people those 12 tribes or those 12 sons would multiply into. So that would be the end of Genesis. Go 400 years later, and we're talking about a new Pharaoh, and there's just 600,000 Jews living in this settlement, Israelites. And the new Pharaoh enslaves them. He's nervous about the numbers. He also, you get Moses. Moses' mother puts Moses in a basket and sends him down the Nile River, where he's picked up by the Pharaoh's daughter. And Moses is raised in the palace of the Pharaoh. Moses grows up. He later has guilt about the way the Israelites or his people are being treated. He actually kills an Egyptian, runs out in the desert. You get the burning bush. God tells him, free his people. Moses comes back to Egypt and tells the Pharaoh, you got to let my people go. This is where you get the 10 plagues. Now, these 10 plagues are important. Well, the last plague is important. The last plague is the angel of death. Angel of death is going to take the firstborn son. Again, here's that theme of the firstborn son being taken. But the Israelites are given instructions to put the blood of the lamb on their doorstep, and the angel of death will pass over them. Now, this whole ritual of killing the lamb and putting the blood becomes a Passover ritual. This is extremely important to Christianity because Jesus becomes the Passover lamb, saving us from the angel of death. So this is very pivotal. You need to realize that this is where it comes from. It's the 10th plague. It's the Passover festival that Jesus dies at. And this is where it comes from. So the firstborn, the Israelites don't lose their firstborn. Egypt suffers the firstborn, especially the Pharaoh's son is killed by the angel of death. The Pharaoh lets the Egyptians go. Then he has second thoughts, chases after them. This is where Moses parts the Red Sea. Israelites are allowed to pass through while the Red Sea engulfs the Pharaoh's army behind them. Then the Israelites are free in the desert. They'll wander the desert for 40 years. But God will provide bread from heaven. This becomes manna. He will also provide water from the rock. This is pivotal to Christianity because Jesus is the bread from heaven and will become the water from the rock. We'll get into that, but realize this is where it comes from in Exodus, this story of providing food from heaven. Then they camp out at Mount Sinai, and Mount Sinai is where Moses is giving the instructions and the conduct of how the Israelites are to live. On Mount Sinai, he is given the 10 Commandments, as well as all the rules of conduct, the rules of the Sabbath, the rules of the courts, the rules of marriage, the rules of judges, the rules of the tribal roles, what the tribe of Levi will take care of the ark and the tabernacle, the life of Judah, the role of Judah tribe will take care of the leadership. So this is all at Mount Sinai. You get the instructions to Moses on how to create the ark, which will house the manna, the bread from life, the 10 Commandments, as well as Aaron's rod, which was used to turn into a snake. It's the head shepherd's rod put into, and that will become put into the ark, and that will become the presence of God put in the tabernacle. The tabernacle will turn into the first temple when David comes along, as well as the second temple later on. All in all, the overall theme of these first 5 books is establishing the rules of the Jewish people and how they are conduct themselves, as well as the disappointing way that the Jews sin. They continually sin. God takes them out of the desert and they want to go back. They're at Mount Sinai and they make a golden calf. It's a non-stop, continual disappointment, a theme of continual disappointment and sin. But it is okay because God has already prophesied that someone else will come along to redeem all the sin in the Old Testament.